This is the world's first Redmi Note series device to incorporate a Super AMOLED display, and it does so in style with a silky smooth 120Hz refresh rate panel. This is TechNick, and this is my unboxing and extremely detailed review of the Redmi Note 10 Pro, in which I'll cover design, display, cameras, software, speakers, gaming, and finally benchmarks. But before we get going, it's worth mentioning that I have the European version of the device. In India, this model is known as the Note 10 Pro Max. European prices are at the top right corner, and I must add, these prices are insanely good for what this phone has to offer. We're talking 120Hz AMOLED display, Snapdragon 732G chipsets, 5020 mAh battery, 108 megapixel camera setup, and the list goes on. But first, what's inside the box? Well, Redmi haven't skimped out here at all. We get a silicon case, of course we get the device as well. We get a USB Type-C to Type-A with a nice orange accent, and we also get a charger in the box. Yes, that's right, in the box, 33 watt charging, and yes, it can charge at 33 watts. And finally, let's unwrap the device. This is the Onyx Gray version of the phone. Looks absolutely classy. You also get it in Glacier Blue and Gradient Bronze. I must say, it looks a lot more expensive than what it is. This is a very premium looking device. That camera setup at the back is also putting on quite a show, I must add. 5020 mAh battery, 33 watt fast wire charging, IP53 dust and splash resistance, and we also get NFC, Bluetooth 5, and an IR blaster on top. We have Gorilla Glass 5 on the front, we have a glass back, and unfortunately plastic sides, but they look pretty aluminum to me. The phone feels great, though it picks up quite a hefty amount of fingerprints, though fear not, you do get that silicon case in the box, so I'm not quite sure about this little Type-C port cover over there. We do have a fingerprint sensor integrated within the power button, a non-split volume rocker as well on the right hand side, and we do have dual SIM and a dedicated spot for a micro SDXC slot, which is great. USB Type-C 2.0 speeds at the bottom. We have a bottom firing speaker as well as a top firing speaker for dual audio, and we have a 3.5mm headphone jack, and to top things off we have an IR blaster as well. The camera bump at the back is quite hefty. It's a bit of a step ladder over there, like I mentioned with the previous Mi 11, even heftier than that one, even bigger than the Mi 10 Ultra, which makes for quite a bit of wobble when on a flat surface. Though design wise, it actually looks fantastic. Definitely in between the segments of the budget range of phones and the premium range of phones. This looks a lot more premium than Xiaomi's previous budget-friendly devices. It really does showcase this back off quite nicely, I must say. I'm a little bit in love with it, but what about that front? Well, we get welcomed to a 20:9 aspect ratio, 6.67 inch dot display. It is Full HD plus with 395 ppi. It is an AMOLED display with 120Hz refresh rate and 240Hz touch sampling rate. It is clear and crisp and goes all the way up to a max brightness of 1200 nits. And you can see it compared to its predecessors on the left-hand side, the Note 80 and Note 90, which have lackluster LCD displays. This is an AMOLED display on par with Xiaomi's best flagships ever released, and it definitely shows. It looks absolutely fantastic, and white balance is just as good as Xiaomi's top tier devices. As you can see, comparing the bezels over here, it's not quite as slim as the flagship phones on the right hand side, but it's definitely a lot slimmer than Xiaomi's budget line on the left hand side. Now, of course, the best trait of this phone is that AMOLED panel, and no less the 120Hz as well. Compared to the previous Redmi Note devices at 60Hz, you definitely feel a difference. It is ridiculously silky smooth as you would experience when picking up a flagship device and sprinting through that nonetheless. We have a couple other display options here. We can change the color, brightness, we can hide the notch, as you've seen with MIUI 12 in the past. It does a great job with all things. We also have dark mode. I dig this transition mode over here when jumping into dark mode. It works for all third-party apps as well, such as Facebook and Google Calendar, which actually comes pre-installed, by the way, because this is pretty Google-centric, this device and MIUI 12. We also have an always-on display with loads of customization options. We have one that changes throughout the day, and we have a kaleidoscope option, which is not as customizable as Oppo's Color OS, but it's still customizable nonetheless, and I still prefer the basic one. But this one lets it change color automatically throughout the day, which I've never seen before. I'm really intrigued by this. We do have an ARC side mounted fingerprint sensor. This is physical. It is nice and snappy. It's not indented like Xiaomi's previous devices, which I really like. It looks more like just a power button. You wouldn't really say that this passes for a fingerprint sensor as well. Like Xiaomi's previous devices, like the Note 80 with a physical one at the back, it's definitely quicker than that. On par, if not quicker than the Note 90. on par with Xiaomi's best devices as well, which have optical readers underneath the display. I'm not quite sure why they didn't put an optical one under the display since this is an AMOLED panel, but I guess to bring costs down, it's still nice and snappy and very convenient to use. Also have facial recognition here. Unfortunately, it is unsecure, but I mean, at this price point, you wouldn't expect 3D facial recognition here. You don't even see those on Samsung's best flagships, but it still does a great job. It is nice and snappy. Not the quickest that I've seen, but still gets you in the phone darn quick. We have a 16 megapixel f2.45 selfie snapper. It is the smallest one I have ever seen in the world, and no doubt it takes absolutely phenomenal pics, even when shooting portraits. Technic here, recording a 1080p 30 FPS selfie video on the brand new Redmi Note 10 Pro. There is a bit of traffic down there and it's raining outside, so if you hear any background noise, that's what's happening. I guess it's a good way to test out the clarity of picking up voices when recording video. Anyway, let me know what you guys think of the audio and video quality when using the selfie cam at the max mode 1080p 30 FPS on the Redmi Note 10 Pro. We also have something called dual video mode, and it's pretty cool how you can seamlessly switch between which front or back cam you want to focus on. You just switch like this. So simple, so easy. I wish more dual video enabled smartphones did this. This is really cool. We can also take some snaps at night. This is night mode off, using the selfie cam. Night mode on doesn't look too great, but the flash on looks the best of the three, so definitely use the flash if you do decide to pick up the device. At the back, we have a 108 megapixel Samsung ISOCELL HM2 with an aperture of f1.9. This does pixel binning in a 9:1 ratio down to 12 megapixels to get the best version of a super pixel. We also have an 8 megapixel ultra wide sensor, 5 megapixel telemacro sensor, and a 2 megapixel depth sensor. The ultra wide looks pretty fantastic, even though it's only 8 megapixels. I would have wanted this a bit higher, but the 108 megapixel main camera takes a great shot, binning it down using AI even better. Zooming in with the telemacro camera actually keeps quite a lot of detail, but as soon as you go past that into 5 times digital zoom, it completely blows out. Same thing with the max zoom, which is 10x. Now when it comes to close up and personal, that telemacro cam can also be used to take macro shots. It does a superb job here, and once again, it was raining on this day that I took these snaps, and such a darn brilliant job picking up those little rain droplets. When it comes to portrait, it does a superb job, barely any edge detection, around little buzz over there, and we are capped at 30 FPS when it comes to 4K, which is a bit of a bummer, but because it's a mid-range chipset, you would kind of expect it. It still does a great job, though luckily we do have 1080p 60 FPS, which is nice and smooth, much smoother than 30 FPS, of course, but lacks a little bit of the detail. We do have other options here, that being ultra wide, of course, but capped at 30 FPS and at 1080p. I would have hoped that this would be 4K 30 FPS. Nonetheless, it's still pretty good, nice and wide at 118 degrees field of view. Steady video off over here. Steady video on is capped at 1080p 30 FPS as well. It's nice and stable, though you do lose a tad bit of quality. Now when it comes to recording with the macro lens, it actually does a much better job than I was expecting. And when it comes to night photography, it does a pretty decent job, but the main camera is so bright already that it takes a good job with night mode off anyway. Buzz looks a lot better here though, a little bit blurry, and turning on the flash, definitely once again the best option with close subjects, though it blows out the background. 4K 30 FPS shooting video at night. We don't have a night video option like we saw with the Mi 11, though it still does a pretty decent job even when zooming in at night when it's kind of coming down with rain. Now when it comes to software, we do have MIUI 12 skinned over Android 11. Like I've said in the past, I'm really waiting for MIUI 12.5, which is going to incorporate better with the hardware of all Xiaomi's latest devices. All the features that you're seeing here are all the features that you've been seeing on Xiaomi devices for the last, I guess, the last year or the last couple months. And they're all great features. We have multitasking, we have mini window, floating window, that is, and the list just goes on. You know, there are a lot of things that you can do with MIUI 12. Sorry about that slide around over there. This phone is a little bit slippery at the back. We do have some wallpapers, no live wallpapers pre-installed like we've seen before. But the best thing here is that we have Google within the device, within settings. Google is rooted everywhere in this phone. It feels like a Google device, and yes, the haptics are pretty darn good at this price point as well. Now let's talk about the audio over here. We do have dual speakers, but how do they compare to the Harman Kardon audio of the Mi 11? We do have Game Turbo, which is gaming software within Xiaomi's MIUI 12. It does a great job of like on-screen overlay when playing a game. You can flick to it from the side and you can pop up some multi-windows or some floating windows. You can screen record and all that jazz. We do have a Snapdragon 732G under the hood, which is supposedly 5% faster than the 730G, 15% faster when it comes to graphics. Talking about graphics, our first game here will be Genshin Impact. And going into this one, this first bit that we're doing is the absolute max graphics that you can set within the game and 60 FPS. You can see the FPS counter at the top there, sitting around the 30 FPS mark, which is not the best, it's not the worst. Now we're going to drop all the graphics to the lowest preset, but keep the 60 FPS. Now you can see we've jumped up about 10 frames per second here. Things still look absolutely gorgeous. This is a great looking game, and on this wonderful AMOLED display, colors really do pop, and it's nice and bright, especially if you decide to play outdoors. And if we look at the performance comparing the highest quality presets to the lowest quality presets on this game, both set at 60 FPS. We have 32 frames per second on the highest graphics setting as opposed to 41 on the lowest, which is actually really good for a device with a mid-range chipset, no doubt. Now, moving on to PUBG Mobile, unfortunately, the highest FPS that we can get is Ultra, and only when set to balanced, and we can only go up to HD, not HDR. And if you do go up to HD, then we can't get the Ultra FPS. And our Ultra FPS caps you at 40, high caps you at 30, so we're capped at 40 here because of the game, not because of the device. It still looks great, still nice, silky smooth. Hopefully, PUBG Mobile do incorporate 90 frames per second for this device, since it can go all the way up to 120, like we can see here with Dead Trigger 2 hitting almost 120 frames per second in Dead Trigger 2 with all the graphics set to max. This is absolutely phenomenal for a phone at this price. Hitting an average of 108 frames per second with this game is just darn impressive. Now, Real Racing 3 has no frames per second cap either. It should be going to 120. Obviously, we're going to have to wait and see what the devs do with the Redmi Note 10 series and Real Racing 3, but we're sitting at a rock solid 60. Now, when it comes to benchmarks, we're going to be testing out 3 here, but first we're going to test out the temps as well as the battery. We'll compare this at the end of the 3 benchmarks. We're going to run through AnTuTu, of course, and then we're going to jump through Geekbench 5 and then 3D Mark Wildlife. We're going to speed through all of them here, and then we're going to get to that battery at the end as well as the temps at the end. But before we can actually reach the end, Geekbench has to run, and like many other Xiaomi devices before this, I think it has something to do with Geekbench, not the actual device. It keeps killing the app, so no score over there. At the end here, we have a battery drain of 5%, and it only drained by a rate of 13.9 milliamp hours per minute. Now, that is quite a lot better than the average battery drain doing this exact same test on my channel. And when it comes to temps, it only gained 11.6 degrees in Celsius, which may seem hot, but the average temp gain doing this exact same test run on my channel is around 12.7. AnTuTu score over here, 292,435, which is absolutely superb. It puts it above its predecessor chipsets, the 720G and 730G, by quite a bit. Unfortunately, Geekbench did crash at the end, and there is no way around this. I guess we're going to have to wait for things to get fixed before we can get a solid score. But based on the results online, I saw that it got a single core of 567 and multi of 1787, which once again puts it in the middle of the table. When it comes to 3D Mark Wildlife, this is a very strenuous benchmark test. So 6.7 FPS for a mid-range chip compared to all these other chipsets over here, even the Snapdragon 750G, it's beating that one, meaning that this is an absolute gaming beast compared to other mid-range chips around. The Redmi Note 10 Pro is more than just a premium looking device with a great price tag. It takes incredible snaps with its 108 megapixel main sensor. It has a flagship level build, speedy physical arc fingerprint sensor, Google-centered software, which is simple and easy to use with some useful features on top. Silky smooth 120Hz refresh rate panel, which has you flying around your device, which when paired with the more than capable Snapdragon 732G chipset, games like an absolute champion. And of course, we can't forget the star of the show, that being the extremely bright AMOLED display. It might be similarly priced to its budget-friendly Redmi cousins, but it feels just as premium and performs just as well in most areas as its Xiaomi flagship counterparts, making the Redmi Note 10 Pro the perfect device for those who want flagship level quality for an unbeatable price.